A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
20 years ago, in September 1993, then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin signed the Oslo Accords with the PLO terror organization, which led to the creation of the Palestinian Authority. What lessons can be drawn from all that has transpired from that time to this?
First of all, we should list the clear and obvious negative results of those supposed peace accords. First of all, at the time of the negotiations conducted in secret behind everybody's back, which led to the Oslo Accords, in other words, we're talking about 1992, 1993, at that time the PLO was essentially breathing its last breaths on its deathbed. It had been exiled to Tunis in the wake of the 1982 Lebanon War, which of course was the result of incessant attacks on Israel, on northern Israel, by PLO forces stationed in southern Lebanon. And the world was basically, by and large, ready to forget about the PLO. And then, lo and behold, the geniuses who were leading Israel at that time, that is to say, supposedly being led by Yitzhak Rabin, but in actual fact being led by Shimon and his minions, these people resuscitated the PLO and brought it back to life. Not only did they bring it back to life diplomatically, they actually returned it to the heart of Eretz Yisrael, our homeland, the land of Israel, and gave them a territorial base from which they could continue to prosecute their war against the Jewish people and against their state. That's number one. Number two, it is a simple objective fact that since the Oslo Accords, over 2,000 Israeli citizens, including some Arabs one might add, have been killed, and over 10,000 have been maimed by Arab terrorist attacks carried out by the PLO and its associated organizations, and also by the Hamas. But all this is a result of the Oslo Accords. Those numbers are far greater than the numbers of Israelis killed and injured in the 45 years preceding the Oslo Accords. Therefore, one can simply say that by that standard alone, this agreement was not a great success. Number three, the Oslo Accords inevitably resulted in the delegitimization of Israel in the international community. When you sign an agreement and shake the hand of an enemy, a terrorist murderer such as Yasser Arafat, and you therefore imply, at the very least, that there is some truth and some merit to his claims regarding your own homeland, the territory on which your nation, your state exists, it is impossible that many people in the world will not therefore begin to wonder whether in fact you have a legitimate claim to that territory, to that piece of land on which your nation, on which your state exists. And therefore the Oslo Accords, by granting legitimacy to the PLO and their claims obviously would have to lead to the delegitimization of Israel and the Jewish claim to its ancient homeland. Two other points should be mentioned here, and that is, one, that the PLO, headed by Yasser Arafat at that time, like any other terror organization, or for that matter, like any other Arab state or Muslim organization, had no intention of abiding by any agreement to which it signed its name. For those who question what I say here, I suggest that they go and look in the history books and find an instance where an Arab state or a Muslim organization or a Muslim terror organization signed an agreement and then continued afterwards to abide by that agreement. This pattern is hardly new, as everyone should know. The founder of the satanic religion, Islam, Muhammad, was known for making agreements with tribes in Arabia at that time who opposed him, promising them peace and a cessation of hostilities. And then, as soon as he had the upper hand, as soon as he felt that he was able to exterminate his enemies, he did so. And therefore no one should be surprised that the very same day that Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords on the lawn of the White House, that very same day in the evening, he gave an interview on Jordanian TV in which he said, in Arabic of course, so that the New York Times wouldn't report it, that nothing has changed, and of course we do not accept Israel's existence, and we intend to destroy Israel and the Jewish people. And this is just a ruse and a tactic by which to gain some territory and some legitimacy in order to continue our campaign against the Jewish people. The second point I would add is that any reasonable person with any basic knowledge of Arab and Islamic history knows that the Arabs, the Muslims, and specifically in this case the PLO and Yasser Arafat, never did have, nor do they today have, any desire for peace or any kind of compromise. They have no interest in peace or compromise. These ideas are foreign to them, as they are foreign to Islam.
So why is it that the Oslo Accords did not bring peace?
The answer to that question is exceedingly simple and straightforward. The Oslo Accords did not bring peace because they never could have brought peace, because the basis of the state of affairs between the Arabs and the Jews in the Middle East has nothing to do with Jewish towns and villages in Judea and Samaria or any other part of the country. It has nothing to do with a refugee problem about which the Arabs of all people could not care less. They care much less about so-called refugees, to the extent that there are such legitimate refugees to this day. They care much less about them than Norway or Sweden, perhaps. It has nothing to do with a desire to reconstitute so-called Palestinian nationhood and sovereignty and independence, for the simple reason that no such thing ever existed. There never has been a Palestinian nation. There is no Palestinian language, and there is no such thing as Palestinian culture. They are part and parcel of the Arab Muslim world, just as Iraq is part of that world, that is to say the Sunnis and the Shiites and the Alawites and the Arabs in Libya and the Arabs in Egypt, etc. They are all part of the Arab nation, and this has nothing to do with their opposition to Israel. Their opposition to Israel is rooted in their religion, in Islam, because according to Islam there is no possibility of accepting, under any circumstances, a situation in which a piece of land that was once under the rule of Muslims, under some form of Islamic rule, whether it be Arabs who conquered this country, who came out of Saudi Arabia, what is today called Saudi Arabia, in the 7th century, or whether it was the Ottoman Turkish Empire in more recent times. As long as this land was under some form of Islamic rule, no Arab on earth, and no Palestinian, because there was no such thing as a Palestinian, and there still is not such a thing, no Arab on earth had a problem with this. But as soon as this territory, which was once ruled by Muslims, passed over into the hands of non-Muslims, and not just non-Muslims, but the worst of all non-Muslims in their eyes, that is to say, the Jews, the people that their own false prophet Muhammad refers to as the people of the book, from whom they stole, or borrowed if you prefer, if you wish to be more politically correct, all the essential major positive aspects of their false religion, Islam. As soon as this territory passed over into the hands of Jews, that is the problem from their point of view. In other words, the Arabs, whether they call themselves Palestinians or Arabians or Jordanians or Lebanese, all these terms are irrelevant because they're all modern and invented terms, as we will mention in a moment. As soon as this occurred, all Arabs throughout the world were outraged because a piece of territory that was once Islamic is no longer Islamic. That is the problem. It is therefore a purely religious issue. It is not a political, it's not a military issue. It has nothing to do with rights or independence or peace. It has everything to do with the Islamic inability to accept that a territory that they once controlled is no longer theirs. And this is true not just in the land of Israel, this is true throughout the world. Wherever Muslims believe that they should rule, which essentially means the entire globe, but particularly in the first place areas which they once controlled, any such area in their book must be released from foreign occupation as they view it. This is the essence of the Middle East problem.
What of Shimon Peres's dream of a new Middle East?
Shimon Peres's pipe dream of a new Middle East was always just that, a pipe dream. Because the new Middle East is simply a continuation of the old Middle East. And the old Middle East, that is to say the Middle East of the 20th century, is the result of fictitious and baseless borders drawn up by two colonial powers, Britain and France, in the wake of the First World War and the disintegration of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. They sat down with the maps, the generals and the diplomats, and they drew up all kinds of nice shapes on the map in front of them with all kinds of straight lines, which are always an indication that we're talking about an artificial border, nothing natural or historic. And these, of course, led to hypothetical and non-viable states, as we see today. The Middle East today is full of failed states, such as Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Lebanon, just for example, to mention a few, which are in the process of breaking down into small fiefdoms ruled by warlords such as Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda affiliated groups. This is the new Middle East to which we can look forward as long as we are unable or unwilling to deal with reality and see the facts for what they are. The only way that peace will come to the Middle East is to understand the nature of Islam, its extremely negative impact on the world, both in the past and specifically in our own time, and to begin to understand, finally, once and for all, that there will be no peace in the Middle East until the Jewish nation has a country based on the borders of the Torah. And all manner of invented nations invented by European colonial powers, nations such as Jordan, for example, an invention of British diplomacy against international law, against the mandate it received from the League of Nations, etc., etc. All such imaginary, ephemeral, and fictitious countries and nations will eventually disappear, not because necessarily the West will cause them to disappear, but because the Arabs themselves, the Muslims themselves, will cause these nations and these frameworks to disintegrate. As we see today, the new Middle East is a Middle East in which Muslims kill Muslims on a daily basis wherever you look. The nature of the Middle East, old or new, is a function of the nature of Islam and the Arab nation, which is pillage, murder, destruction, and backwardness. Those are the historical facts, which are of course not very politically correct, but then again I'm not known for being politically correct, so that's all right. The only thing that we can do about the Middle East is, one, establish a Jewish state and homeland for the Jewish nation in all the territory which rightfully belongs to the Jewish people, based on the Torah and based on historical realities, number one. And number two is to finally come to grips with, recognize openly and freely admit the pernicious impact of Islam on the world in general and on the Middle East in particular.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. A word to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, or if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.